Hello, it's Tiago here from the iPhone 7 cam. I just wanted to mention that we had a lot of technical difficulties in recording this episode. I've tried to stitch it up as best as possible, but some things might still not make sense. Just give us a bit of leeway, it's only our third episode. The other thing is, if you're watching the video, you might notice that I digivolve into a slice of cheese about halfway through the episode. I'm really sorry, there's nothing to do about that. Hopefully it's better next week, but it's still a good episode. I still really enjoyed making it, and I hope you enjoy it too.
It's one of the most extraordinary moments in Britain's history. Prime Minister Boris Johnson refusing calls from his own cabinet to resign. Nine's Brett McLeod is outside the Prime Minister's residence. Brett, the Queen could be dragged into this mess.
This is the site of one of the highest wind speeds ever recorded by man.
Arson could be the cause of a fire at the Sydney home of controversial comedian, commentator and YouTuber Friendly Geordies.
Supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
It's a lovely sunny day here in Scotland as I turn into a weather reporter. So that's quite nice compared to the horrible bit of rain and misery that we had yesterday. But yeah, no, I'm good. It's a good morning.
Did it snow much longer since after we last spoke, or was it just that day?
Yeah, it pretty much snowed for like another 2 days. And everything was more or less coated, and the whole of the UK was freaking out because there was like a centimetre of snow in Manchester.
Oh, I did. I went to my uncle's house that night, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I talked to Will today, and it's snowing in Aberdeen." And he was like, "Oh yeah, everyone's talking about the snow at the moment."
yeah, no, it was actually a pretty big thing. People got like stuck on freeways for like 7 hours overnight in like sub-zero temperatures. So I probably shouldn't make jokes out of it, but you know, anyway, it's just ironic that you know, Britain's the weather battered country, and then the second anything half decent kind of weather-wise happens to us, everyone just freaks out. But anyway, enough of the weather. How are you going? How's things in sunny old Perth?
I'm doing really well, actually. It's been a great couple of weeks, you know, on that uni grind. But
on the uni grind.
But yeah, I was talking to you before. We've been doing a bit more fishing at the moment. Yeah,
spearfishing.
Spearfishing.
Yes.
We had to spend some time researching the legalities of that. We aren't breaking the law.
Yeah. How difficult is it? I'm actually quite curious. How difficult is it to spearfish? How successful have you been?
As in, like, the actual act of spearfishing, or how to do it legally?
The bureaucracy. No, the actual act of. Maybe we can have a whole episode on the bureaucracy of spearfishing. But how difficult is it to spear a fish?
Well, I assume with a gun it would be quite easy, but
okay.
We're not licensed to use spear guns because it's like $70 a year, and you know we're starving uni students at the moment. So we just bought. They're called Gidgee spears. You've probably seen them before, Will. They're like a metal pole, and they've got a spearhead on the end with like some prongs coming out of them, and they have a bit of elastic on them. So you pull the elastic back, and then you release it, and it like shoots out. And the first two times we caught nothing. But as we've gotten the hang of it more, we've actually caught more fish than we really know what to do with. So
really, okay.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun and learning it, and but yeah, it is a hassle to get to.
Is it quite a like the actual physical activity? Is it quite therapeutic or centering?
Yeah, it is, because you have to hold your breath for quite long periods of time when you're underwater.
Oh yeah. Oh wait, you do it underwater?
Yeah. So basically you're snorkeling, and you see a fish, and you dive down, and you hit it.
In my head, you were like next to a river, throwing spears into a river. Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
No.
So the problem with doing it that way is the light bends what you see in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
water. So you like aim it at a fish, what you think
That
is a
old
fish,
trick.
but it's like a But no, it's been good. But you have to get your heart rate
Wow.
right down so you can hold your breath.
Jeez. Yeah.
So Will, what have you been reading or watching this week?
I have been watching the new Ant-Man film, Quantumania, Quantumverse, Ant-Man: The Quantum Realm. It's I don't know. To start with, I'm not a very big fan of I'm not a big fan of Marvel, but you see, Ant-Man holds a special place in my heart because it was the first Marvel film I ever saw, the original Ant-Man. But so I mean, and I actually I quite enjoyed the original Ant-Man, but this third variation was, to be honest, pretty terrible.
I haven't heard great things. I saw it had like 42% on Rotten Tomato.
Yeah.
I haven't actually spoken to anyone who's gone and seen it, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, no. It was, I mean, I suppose it's the classic Marvel criticism at the moment, is it's just kind of a mass-produced, pumped-out, mega budget film with lots of CGI and a poorly written script with some, decently big name actors, which I suppose they expect to carry it. But I don't know. I mean, Marvel is a bit of an anomaly to me because it's like, on one hand, you've got like the classic superheroes of good versus evil, right? And then you've got, from my understanding, the kind of like Doctor Strange kind of passage of things where there's like a little bit of magic. And then you've got like the more Ant-Man side of things where it's like quantum universes and several different variations of all possibilities intertwining with each other. So there's like this kind of spacey scientific thing all combined. I mean, you know Marvel a lot better than me, but I find that side of things quite interesting. So yeah, I don't know.
I do think it's a bit of a shame, really, because not that I love all of the Marvel stuff, but it's a lot of like, it's fun. You sort of switch your brain off a bit, but I think even in that respect, I mean, there's been some good movies recently, but the majority, and this has been said a million times, and I see it in my TikTok feed, or I don't have TikTok, but in my like Instagram reels, YouTube shorts, it's constantly like the current state of the Marvel universe is in terrible trouble.
Yeah.
And I on one hand, I'm like, it's sad, it's disappointing, but people are getting very angry about it. I don't know if you've seen this, Will.
No, I haven't. I mean, it's not something to be getting angry about.
It's a bit like over the top, but yeah, it is disappointing. And as you said, I find like bringing this sci-fi element into a world of magic and technology, and then it'd be cool to have like this mesh of
the classic
genres.
Yeah, no, it was odd. Like, to be quite frank, it got to the point, like there was literally a point in the film where they had accidentally gone into the quantum world, and all the main characters were like were in this new alien planet, and it was literally like Star Wars. They walked into like a cantina kind of thing with like a bar, and there were all these different aliens around, and they like walked up to the bar, and this like multi-pronged alien like served them a thing of like blue juice, and I was like, this is just Tatooine, like what's happening here? And then like and then they sit down at a table, and there's like this old friend that one of the main characters knew, who's like going to help them find this other person who's like this other alien. And I'm like, this is just Star Wars.
But that could
and
be
then
cool,
Bill Murray.
Right? Like if you
What's
like,
that? It
could be cool to have like a Star Wars inspired story enmeshed with all these other stories. But you have to make it different, I guess.
You have to make it different. Like Star Wars did it well. The way that Marvel did it, it felt childish and kind of cringe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know the actor Bill Murray?
Oh yeah, he's in it, isn't he?
He's in it.
Yeah.
He's in it like for one scene as this somewhat kind of major character. And his like spaceship lands, and he kind of like rolls out, and it kind of shows every angle of him except his face. And I was sitting there, I was like, who is this guy? Who is this actor? And then it pans to his face. I'm like, oh my god, it's Bill Murray. What is he doing in Marvel? Yeah, I love it when things like that happen. But anyway, Ant-Man 3, probably not worth your time unless you're a big Ant-Man fan.
Yeah.
I mean, I also disclaimer, I didn't watch the second Ant-Man, so I had to do a lot of leaps of logic. Yeah.
The first two Ant-Man movies are pretty decent movies. They're like fun little heist movies. They're pretty.
Yeah.
They're fun.
Yeah.
They're not like masterpieces or anything by any stretch of the imagination, but I quite like them. But from the moment I saw the trailers, I was like, this looks like Spy Kids, you know?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. Anyway, enough of that. What have you been reading or watching or consuming?
Well, we've already talked about The Last of Us, but the last episode of that came out last night, so I enjoyed that.
Oh yeah.
But
right.
We've already talked about that. I watched, God, the most obscure interview. It was Friendly Geordies, right, Will?
Yeah.
He did an interview with this this journalist. This is a couple of years ago, so it's quite outdated now. Called Michael West, and
okay,
I thought it might be interesting, but it was honestly like a lot of like the mining lobbies and the local legislation and the bloody this and that, and it just kind of made me depressed because it was a lot of talking about like, if you're in politics, you're basically being talked to by a bunch of heads of big business and all this whatnot. And it was like, I at the beginning I was like, this is kind of cool. It would be cool to talk about on the podcast. And then I was like, I can't deal with watching and reading those things too much because it just it seeps into
into your soul.
Yeah.
Is it the main point that like modern democratic politics is being completely rigged by vested interest of big business and media corporations?
Pretty much.
And all of that.
It was some interesting stuff talking about media where he was Michael West, who I really like Michael West and I really like Friendly Geordies. I just didn't particularly like this interview. He was saying that like now that there's so much online stuff, the like sort of mainstream media, which has its own connotations and conspiracy and stuff like that, but they struggle to make as much money. So obviously, when big business wants to sponsor them, they're going to take that because they won't be making money otherwise, which I thought was somewhat interesting. Whereas back in the day, you'd have 9 million people tuning into an early morning radio show, which you just wouldn't get now. So But yeah, my main takeaway from that was I probably should stop watching. But the one positive thing, I mean, Michael West kept saying COVID. That was pretty funny instead of COVID.
Oh, it's Is he Australian?
Yeah, he's Australian.
Okay, because I've heard a few people say COVID rather than COVID.
I didn't know what he was talking about. I thought he was talking about like some random government commission or something like that.
I don't know, but the only people I've heard say COVID over COVID are English people, so I thought maybe it was an English thing. But
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if he was doing it as a joke because in Australia I've heard no one say COVID.
No, I've never heard it in Australia either. No. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty depressing when you get down that deep rabbit hole of like big tech, well, not big tech, big corporations lobbying MPs and corruption scandals and the control. I mean, debatable on which side you stand on this, but I suppose that sometimes the overarching control that unions perhaps play within the Labour Party and things like that. And I think you have to at least realize that your most basic kind of backbench MP within a liberal democracy is day in, or their day in, their day out. They're representing their constituents, which is quite an important, dutiful thing to do. They're going to events within their constituency and linking their constituency back to the center of government. They might be working away on a government committee or a bipartisan committee or a different kind of governmental committee to develop a report which investigates an incredibly important thing. I mean, they might have a what's called like I think it's called a personal members bill or something, which in the UK there's like this ballot, and if you get chosen, you can develop your own specific bill, which will then hopefully be passed through Parliament. And with things like that, you can have MPs who've had incredibly specific things happen to them in the past develop bills, which then help to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Like there's an MP, Dehenna Davidson, for Bishop Auckland up in the northeast of the UK, and I think it was her father was killed by the one. You know how you can, if you punch someone in the back of the head, like in a precise enough point, you can just kill them.
Yeah.
I think there's like a one punch death, or there's a catchphrase
The coward's
for it.
punch.
But anyway,
that was
there's the coward's punch
that was going around.
Yeah. Anyway, so anyway, she had a history with this, and I'm not sure if she is actually turning it into her own private members bill, but I think that's an example of how that could happen. So it's very easy to get dumbed down and depressed about the kind of overarching power which big business and stuff and media and whatever has within our elected politics. But at least there are a genuine number of politicians who are out there day to day kind of doing genuinely meaningful and productive things.
Well, I agree with you there, Will, but you understand once you start getting into the weeds of politics and the deep-rooted issues in our system, why people don't want to focus on the big overarching issues, because you just depress yourself at a certain point. Whereas if you talk about like little changes that can happen bit by bit, little social changes that will make your life better in little ways, they're executable, you can get people on your side. It doesn't need to pass legislation or anything like that. And it just made me have more of an understanding of well, not just this interview. This has been sort of a thought in my mind for a while, of why you would be attracted to those smaller scope issues.
Yeah. I mean, a lot. The other thing, right, is a lot. I mean, again, just talking about elected MPs, a lot of them don't have the power or the position to actually comment on the larger things, which, for example, you were saying are more important for the country. So I think, because I'm not sure how many it is, but I think there are something like 100 like ministers and junior ministers within the government, and they have the authority, the power, the knowledge, the expertise, the advisors to comment, guide, legislate on the big issues. But then there's also like more than 150, 200 of the smaller backbench MPs, which I was talking about before, who actually focus on the smaller issues. So I think with what you've been saying, there's actually not half and half, but there's a divide between elected officials who have the authority, power, and advice, and to enact and guide on those, the financial, the international, the larger global warming, whatever, those issues that you're talking about. But then there are also the other MPs who are behind the scenes working away on the local things, because they don't actually have the power, they don't have the advising skills, they don't have the staff, they don't have the information to enact on the bigger issues. All they can do is focus on the smaller ones. So it's a little bit, sometimes as a politician, you don't actually have the audience or the scope to talk about the larger ones, and you're expected to act on the smaller kind of issues within your local constituency.
The thing that I sort of get frustrated with is when like a major party for a country will campaign on something that will I don't want to give any examples because I'm worried that I don't know enough about it, but let's just say you have like the Labour Party and they will be running on like just something that you're like, yeah, that's important, but it affects like 10% of the country, or it affects and then you're sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to say it. The referendum we're going to have, well, I think that will be an overall positive for the country from just looking at it from the outside. You would think this is an issue that needs to be addressed, but it's not an issue to hang an election on, because it's more of a social issue. We're coming out of COVID. We have like economic downfall. We have to do something about climate change. Why is everyone focusing so much on one tiny bit of legislation rather than everything else? And then the public conscience is focused on that and not on more important things. But as I said, I understand why you would want to be focused more on that when everything is just so painful when you really get into what goes on up the top in the bigger Parliament House.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that the referendum isn't important. I think it is. It definitely is.
You want to clarify, because some of our viewers, I think 33% of our new Spotify viewers are from the UK. So, if you want to clarify which referendum you're talking about.
We will get into it more in another episode. We got sent a question from our friend Daniel, and he asked what our views on the referendum were. The referendum here is the Voice to Parliament referendum. So in 2017, there was a bunch of Indigenous people that came together, Indigenous elders, and decided that there needs to be constitutional recognition for them in Parliament, and there needs in the Constitution, and there needs to be a advisory council of Indigenous elders that can make suggestions to Parliament, not like override legislation or anything like that, but to advise them on issues that involve them, which is great. I think that's a really good idea, and I think it's going to have a lot of positive impacts, not just for the Indigenous community. But in saying that, do we need to be spending half of the news cycle? Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I suppose you can make the argument that mainstream media obviously benefits from more people consuming their media, and it's a divisive topic, and so the more coverage they give it, the more divisive it becomes, the more people consume it, the more money they make. I mean, that's just a very cynical view, which you could then say is quite sad that such a poignant and nuanced and, deeply symbolic issue to Australia is, you could argue, being manipulated by the media to blow it up, to divide it, for them to make money. Anyway, we should move on, because we want to discuss that more in detail in another episode. But so to move on, Tiago and I have discovered a topic which we disagree on theoretically. We haven't really gotten into grips about it yet. But universities. So the current state of universities in the Western world. Tiago has some views. I have some views which are more my response to Tiago's views, I guess. But Tiago, take it away. What is your thesis on the current? Anyway,
I have sort of come to the conclusion of throughout my studies. I'm studying psychology. In order to become a clinical psychology in Australia, you need to be registered by the Australian Psychology Board, which entails 3 years of bachelor, 1 year of honours, 2 years of masters, and then 2 years of either internship or do your PhD, which, is a lot. But throughout my studies, I have found that everything I'm being taught, I could find in a library, I could find online. Every experience I've had, I could have from talking to people in the field and working in the field. But for psychology, I understand why you'd want a standardized level of learning and of testing in order to have qualified people working with clients. Because if you didn't have that, you would go to a job and be like, oh yeah, I'm self-taught psychologist, and what mother is going to want to put their child in the care of a self-taught psychologist? And I think this applies to other things. For example, like being a doctor, being a nurse, being a speech pathologist, anything medical, if you're an engineer. So this is where what I've come to the conclusion is, unless you're coming into university for a STEM topic, with some exceptions, those exceptions being things like teaching and law, where the same thing applies, where you want standardized people representing you in court, you want people that have a standardized level of education teaching your children. You shouldn't go to university for things like history, philosophy, economics and art,
Sure.
literature, because I think, well, if you're not going to get a certificate, you're going to get a certificate at the end that says this, but as more people go into university, which is great, people it's been a progressive movement for more people to become educated, but it's at the point now where everyone has a degree. If you're going into a job with those degrees, I've heard plenty of anecdotes that say we don't actually look for these things because, and this is what I'll get into, I think things like art and history and philosophy are far more personal things than any sort of STEM subject, where learning about it yourself and having your own experiences and working in a job that looks through that and talking to people in your own time is a far better way of learning about those topics than simply going to lectures, doing tests, doing exams. And the other thing I will acknowledge is, yes, going to university is a fantastic way of networking and finding other people in the industry, but I don't know how valuable it is beyond that.
So the main point is that humanities, would you say abolish the humanities and arts in university?
Except for a few exceptions, yes.
Teaching and law.
Yeah.
Except teaching and law.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I wouldn't say
See,
abolish them. That's a bit extreme, but I don't think you should spend the money and go to
So,
university for them.
But hold on. So if we're not abolishing them so do you think? But so if you think that they shouldn't be in university, but then so we should abolish them, right?
Okay.
Is that, I mean, you might as well go the full way.
Yeah,
There's no point in saying.
For the sake of the argument, let's say abolish them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I am pretty much as far away from this view as you could possibly be. I personally think so. Okay. So STEM. So like all of the things you've raised about STEM. If you're going on for higher education in regards to a STEM subject, you usually want to move into an area of employment which is specifically in relation to that STEM subject that you've been studying, right? So with yourself, you want to be a psychologist, you go through the years and years and years of specifically studying psychology. You want to be a physicist, you go through years and years and years of studying physics. You want to be a chemist, you want to be a mechanical engineer, a biological engineer, a civil engineer. You study those specific civil engineering, mechanical engineering. So the point there is that university for STEM subjects is to specifically end you up with a job. My point is that if you're going to university for a subject or an arts subject, I don't think they're actually there fundamentally to get you a job. I think they're there to round you, and I know this is going to sound pretentious and a bit vague, but I genuinely think that if you're going to university for a HAS subject, the order of that is to round you intellectually as a person, to equip you better to kind of progress further onwards in life and maybe get a job somewhere in relation to what you've studied, maybe not. I think it's a mistake to think that just because you don't need the specific qualifications to become a journalist or to become a historian or to become a novelist or whatever, just because you don't need specific qualifications to do that, I think going to university to do that is incredibly, incredibly important. And I have a few reasons for this. First off, I do understand that within STEM universities, obviously you need scientific labs and you need equipment and all of those kind of things. But within universities, you have you have very specific information finding resources which you can sometimes only find in universities and not within public libraries. So for example, right here in Aberdeen, within the University of Aberdeen, there is a library which is specifically devoted to the study of divinity within theology. So that's not even theology. That's like divinity within theology has a whole library dedicated to it. And there's nowhere else in in the world, I would imagine, I'm sure there's somewhere in the world, but if you're a student and you're studying divinity and you want a specific library which will allow you to study that, then you'd need to go to a university to do that. Also, in regards to records and archives, if you go to Oxford and Cambridge, or any kind of decently old British university or European university, for that matter, I'd imagine, you would be able to find historical records and archives of significant texts, of significant lectures, of significant artifacts, perhaps in a more archaeological sense, which have been collected over the centuries, which can aid you in your studies there. In regards to journalism, you might have a local university newspaper. If you're doing like radio journalism, you could have recording rooms. I think the idea that you only need equipment, like specific equipment for STEM things, is true. But I think you also need a supportive environment and equipment for HASS subjects as well in an area which people don't usually recognize, which can only be found within university.
Can I ask you a question? Would it not be better for all those resources to be free for everyone to be able to access rather than just be in a university? Because if you abolished HASS out of the university, then those resources would have to go somewhere, and you'd assume that would go to public libraries and become public resources.
I don't think the resources would ever exist in the first place.
You don't think they would exist in the first place?
No, because the university, to me, I think, so STEM, I think my fundamental point is that the university is in itself like an intellectual hub of research activity which creates information itself, rather than getting a person from one point of education level to another to get them into a job. I think the idea, like the research and academia which happens within a university, the creation, it's a creative, it itself as an output. I don't know, to give you an example, right? So back in the 18th, 19th century, Scotland had an enlightenment in regards to humanism and rationalism and empiricism with David Hume and all these kind of notable Scottish philosophers. So they had 5 universities in Scotland. They had St Andrews, they had Edinburgh, they had Glasgow, and then they had King's College and Marshall College in Aberdeen. They had 5 universities. At the same point in time, there was only about 2 proper universities in England, and it's even debated whether such an enlightenment even occurred in England. Meanwhile, one did occur within Scotland, and it was mostly, fundamentally because of those 5 universities and the debate they allowed, and the resources which were available, and the kind of specialized hubs of information which they acted as, which wouldn't have worked if they were distributed in a more egalitarian sense, I guess.
Yeah, but if we're talking about unis as they stand now in the modern day, you're right, there's still research that goes on, but far more of it is about moving students through as quickly as possible. And do you think that's more of a fault of the modern university, or do you think that's a...
I think it's more of a fault of the modern university. And this brings me on to my next step, is that if I had the power, I would actually divide the STEM subjects away from university into their own class of further education institution. So in Britain, we had these things called polytechnics, which were, they had them from 1952 or 1955, whatever it was, until 1992. These institutions existed, and they had sorry, is it 52 or is it 60? Sorry, I have some notes. And no, we're disregarded. But so polytechnics, they had the power to give you a degree, a bachelor or undergraduate, or all of that stuff. They had the power to give you a degree which completely equated to a university degree. But the thing was, they were teaching chemistry and physics and science and mathematics and all of those things, while the universities would focus on the arts and history and philosophy. And I think dividing them would then create, the polytechnics would be more of equally as intellectual, equally as esteemed kind of educational grounds to equip you with the specific skills you need to pass you on to the next stage in your job life, while universities would be more of a intellectual research academic hub, which also like well rounds you as an individual for whatever you're going on to, but also creates art and ideas and thought within themselves. I mean, like the university, the institution of the university throughout history has been fundamental in kind of moving and guiding the public intellectual conscience. And it's only through bringing together lots of very intelligent people and teaching them and training them and providing them with the specific tutoring. It's only through bringing them together in a very small geographical area, I think, where you can bring all those ideas together, that kind of idea of intellectual, intellectual progress can happen. I don't know, and I think, yeah.
You're not so much bringing what I've seen. This is all anecdotal, but I've seen it's more you bring these people together, and then they might have different views coming together. But when they come out, they are trained in a certain way. They have learned a certain way to think, and they no longer have these nuanced individual views and come out with sort of more streamlined the way that they've been taught. And I don't think that should be a thing. I think you should maybe have access to these resources, but I don't know if being taught by a governing body, which is the head of the universities, how to do something in this sort of scenario is a good way to go about it.
I mean, within Haas, again, I haven't been to university, so I can't really speak much here. But I know a lot of people, almost all of my friends who do go to university. I mean, there is a lot of leeway within Haas to explore things within your own route, which allows you to come up with your own unique and individual opinions. Would you not say, or do you think people are streamlined into?
I still think no matter what, there's going to be biases within the departments that run these things, and if a department full of people that have their own individual biases are teaching another group, those biases are naturally going to be put onto that group. Like, for example, at the moment I'm doing a unit on biomedical ethics, and pretty much everything we're learning excludes any sort of religious context, which I find funny. Well, it makes sense, right? Because this is an ethics course within a STEMS course. Like, you're not going to get much more practical and straightforward than that. But I just find it interesting that, you know, things like abortion and that sort of stuff come up and no one really debates it. Like, and I find that interesting. When the slides and the lectures and everything defines ethics as a certain thing. It defines this concept as a certain thing. It defines this as a certain thing. I don't think that's encouraging much free thinking. And I really think that it's such a personal discovery that needs to be made with any of these things. And you can find groups of people to discuss these points of view with so easily now. I've also heard stories of people that go into uni for journalism, and basically what the course is a 3-year course of how to get a job at Murdoch, basically, or the ABC. So yeah,
okay. Well, I mean, my comeback to that would be, I mean, if you were studying philosophy within university, you would literally be you would be studying theories. You'd be studying theories which would allow you to question whether or not you should be studying those theories. And you'd be studying theories which would allow you to question, you know, the nature of reality and the ideas of, you know, the ancient Greek philosophers. Or if you were studying history, you would, you would be able to approach it from your own view and be able to debate with people, you know, who have different views with you. I think if you went deep into the Haas side of things within university, you would be able to really flourish with your own individual views, regardless of what the overarching body was trying to teach you. Yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, even if you, so let's, and then if you keep going at that, and maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the track, you're doing a PhD or something, and you're doing like a research kind of thing into your own specific kind of topic, then you would have all of the resources you need, and you'd be completely free to develop your own kind of thesis, devoid of what other people have been teaching you in regard to what that would be. Yeah. Do we want to? Yeah.
It's more complex than you might assume at first, because I think we've come at looking at university as very different things, whereas I've come at it looking at it as an educational tool.
Yeah, I don't look at it as an educational tool.
Right.
I just it's a spot. Okay, so my main point is what's the word? The hyper-localization of very knowledgeable people in one area being taught by increasingly more wise people, and kind of locating them together for years and years and years and years, I think can only result in positive intellectual discovery, ideas, progress, and change. And I think to dissolve the faculties of history, philosophy, art, literature, theater within that context would be a terrible, terrible, terrible thing, and would completely destroy the main aspect of the main aspect of those subjects, which is coming together and discussing. Like the classic debating societies of Oxford and Cambridge are where, you know, you get the most intelligent, kind of brainy young people from across the whole country. You bring them together in a small room and you kind of batter them against each other. And then you bring intellectuals from around the country into the Oxford Union, into the Cambridge Union, and they can ask them questions, and then they can discuss, and they can bring together, and they can bring forward the public kind of intellectual psyche, if that makes sense. So in May 1968 in France, in Paris, students pretty much went on strike and barricaded themselves into their dorms and kind of protested in certain parts of the university as a protest against capitalism and American imperialism and consumerism and all of those things which leftist students like to be angry about. And what happened was, it was actually incredible, right? Because at this point in time, the trade unions in France, weirdly enough, had a really close relationship with the university students in Paris. And so the trade unions in France, across all of France, went on strike as well. And what ended up happening was, let me find the numbers because I have the numbers. 11 million French workers went on strike all around France. That's 22% of the French population in 1968 ended up going on strike. The whole country became paralyzed. It was the largest strike in France's history to ever occur. Charles de Gaulle, who was president at the time, he was evacuated to West Germany. The army was deployed. Paris went into lockdown, and this was all because of a small group of left-wing, radical, politically minded university students in 1968 kind of doing that first protest. And obviously I'm a conservative. I think it was a pretty horrendous thing all around, and that the protests and damage caused wasn't that great. But my point is that it's only through these ideas of universities, the idea of bringing people together in a small geographical area to contest their ideas, it's only through bringing that things like protests and change and discussion, which is so pivotal to the humanities, can occur. If we didn't have universities, that largest strike in France's history would have never occurred. And so I think there's a fundamental difference between studying HAS within university and studying STEM subjects. And I think people approach the studying of HAS in the context of studying STEM, and I think it shouldn't be approached that way. And because of that, I genuinely believe the two should be separated into two different institutions.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah. So it's like, what do you think of that? It's
No,
I don't know.
It rings true to me. We don't, like, that's not what I think HASS subjects are anymore. And I think I would love it if that was what it was. You're right. But then I also think you have to have money to be able to join a university. You have to like, I'm going to end up having to pay like something crazy like $50,000 at the end of my university tuition. And it's you're kind of excluding a whole class of people from that debate by having universities that you need to pay for. And I'm not saying, like, maybe either your two options could be you make university free, or you government subsidize it, or you just take all that stuff outside of university. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I'll come back to that. With Scotland, university in Scotland is fully subsidized by the government.
Right.
So if you do your final 2 years of high school within Scotland, which is free, of course, you do your final 2 years of free high school in Scotland, you then gain complete access, 100% free, to university within Scotland.
Yeah.
You can and then it's up to your academic ability. You can get to the University of St Andrews, you can get to the University of Edinburgh, University of Aberdeen, as long as you're intelligent enough to get there. I don't know the specifics, but it's quite similar in France. University, I'm pretty sure, is massively subsidized in France to allow large numbers of people from all socioeconomic backgrounds to get there. So I think, like, to say, to make the argument that universities are excluding people from lower socioeconomic areas because of their expensive nature, therefore we should distribute all of that wealth equally around the country. I think that's looking at it from the wrong kind of angle. I think that will completely, as I said before, ruin the magic of what a university is, and that instead we should have government subsidies. I guess the only way to do it is through a general overall tax to keep these universities going. Yeah. I mean, does that...
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. In Australia,
it's different.
You have HECS, which then that's the other thing would be broken about how the university system works here, because you don't start paying HECS until you've gotten a job that earns over a certain amount. So it doesn't make sense to then go into uni to get a degree that's not really going to get you a job if you have to pay off that HECS later. But if what you're saying were to be true in Australia, then
it would be change everything.
So
yeah,
just I think we've kind of, on this thing that we've had a disagreement on, kind of landed on a pretty similar conclusion, which is how it works now is probably not ideal.
No.
I still think though that if you put all the ideas in one spot, they're going to over enough amount of time, it's going to turn into one central idea. I don't see how.
I would. Sorry, Tara. I don't know. I'd fundamentally disagree with that. You look at universities, specifically within France. Universities in France were quite not conservative, but they were quite at least in HASS, they were quite mainstream and sensible thinking until about the 1960s. And then in the 1950s, 1960s, you had this radical movement within French universities with Foucault, and then you can kind of go earlier to Sartre and who was the guy who wrote The Stranger again, the book we listened to?
Oh, what's his name?
That's embarrassing.
Mr.
Anyway,
Stranger.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of the French there was a radical rethink within French universities which completely altered the intellectual climate of Western Europe at that point in time. I mean, also, like, the original universities within Britain or within Western Europe were completely, like, almost fully religious organizations. You'd be taught by monks, biblical readings, or you'd also be taught just basic kind of logic and rhetoric going back to the ancient Greeks. And eventually it progressed to the point where, people within universities were specifically questioning whether religion should be accepted at all, whether evolution was the way that the human race came to be, whether the Catholic Church had too much power. I think the idea that universities can become intellectually stagnant is, I don't know, I think by a very nature of having that idea of debate and intellectual discussion, stagnation doesn't occur. Does that make sense? Like, there have been points within history where massive radical shifts have occurred specifically within the confines of universities.
Yeah, but yes, but what you're saying there is there was still periods of one kind of thought which was then radically changed, or was it more of like a? Because from what you're saying, it sounds like during those periods there was one main sort of idea and thought, like what you're saying with the leftist protests in France, right?
Yeah.
There would have to be a lot of people in that cohort that would have been feeling that way, and that's my issue. Even if things do change, I worry that what's trendy at that time is going to be what sort of all the talk and debate goes towards, rather than looking at a. Because if you're doing it individually, and I still think that you should talk to other people, obviously, but if you're doing it individually, you're not going to be influenced by what most people are thinking about and talking about. Because if you're in a room, and not everyone, obviously, but if you're in a room, and we've seen this before when we were in high school, if there's an idea that's most prominent within that group, it's going to be a lot harder for someone to stand up and say, actually, I disagree with this. And although ideally you wouldn't have that, ideally it'd be this wonderful place where everyone felt free to express themselves, I don't think group psychology would allow for that. And from our days in Year 10 Humanities, right, we were asked a question: do you believe that Australia should be a two-party system? And I don't remember what sides we took, honestly. But Will took one side.
Yeah.
And Will was quite an influential person in our school, because, he's Will. He's pretty cool. But Will went to one side, and then one other person went to that side. And then another person went to that side. And then another person. And eventually everyone came to that side. And then, except for me, because I think differently. No, I'm just joking.
No, it was valid what you did there, yeah.
And the humanities teacher asked, why did you come over to this side, to one of the people in Will's group? And they said, well, because everyone else is here. And I don't know, I can't help, and that's obviously a very specific example on a very specific period of time where you're most influenced by your peers. So it's obviously not a perfect example. But I can't help but feel like that would seep into any sort of area where you're trying to have proper debate. And then even if you did have differing sides, I feel like there would really be like one strong side and another strong side, and there wouldn't be much in the middle, because you're looking for a group, you're looking for a tribe. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I think, you've kind of put your finger on one of the major, like, intellectual philosophical problems of all time is the idea of mainstream dominant theories. And I've forgotten the name of it, but there is this idea within philosophy that the intellectual world has a mainstream idea which is popular and which everyone subscribes to, and then it goes through these stages of like acceptance, and then people start poking a few holes at it, and those holes eventually become a flood, and then there's a crisis within the theory. The theory disintegrates. All of the intellectuals suddenly panic and have this debate over what the next theory should be or how that theory should advance, and then a new theory either evolves or they patch up the old theory to make it better, and then it's kind of first looked on with cynicism, and then it's accepted, and then it's mainstream and popular, and then people poke holes at it again, and then it's a flood, and then they change it again, and it's like I mean, we're going very, very abstract here, but the concept of like intellectualism throughout history, I mean, you pretty much just put your finger on the main problem. And then there are two views of that, right? There's the circular view, which is like the human race is never getting anywhere, everything's subjective, all of these theories are useless, yada yada yada. But then there's the other view, which is that as each theory gets destroyed and beaten down, and a new theory comes up, we actually go upwards, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. So that the idea is with each new theory, it's better than the last one. Just a simple thing of evolution. While then you've got the other idea of a circular kind of rotation of intellectual theories, which are all kind of useless. I don't know which side has the better argument, but like it's what you've just said there, Tiago, has always been a problem within the history of intellectualism, like forever. And I think dissolving universities because this problem occurs within universities isn't a good enough reason to do it. I don't know.
Don't you think if everyone individually researched the topics that their own thing and came to conclusions individually and like read 100 books on things that they were interested in, right? And then they came together and then they debated and then they talked about it and the different theories and got different ideas from each other. Don't you think that would be better than everyone learning the same thing together as they grow up, as they grow older? Don't you think that personal journey would lead to more nuance and more discussion and better debate?
I imagine it would, but I don't think I don't think the average 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old has it within them to read 100 books. And it's quite a sad view, but I think for the average kid of 18 to 21, you actually need them to sit down into a lecture to get the information into them. You need to give them the reading material. You need to provide them with the learning capabilities. You need, because if you just say to a kid, okay, you're on your own, read all these books, watch all these documentaries, have a think about all these things, write up your ideas, come back in 5 years later, and then we'll discuss it. I don't think anything will actually get done. I think the institution of a university is fundamental to actually teach kids what they need to be taught, or at least give them the grounding for them to then come up with their own ideas. Maybe it's like, okay, everyone's mainstreamed and taught the same basic stuff within history, philosophy, psychology, all of those kind of things. But the second they get released from the constraints of university and then they're not being taught anything, they have that intellectual knowledge and that intellectual understanding, which is sure being mainstreamed and is the same as everyone else. But the second that stops and they leave university, or they go on to their master's or their PhD or something, they can suddenly branch out into their own specific areas, and then that's when the collaboration, the discussion, and the genuine intellectual progress happens. Because if you just, you know what I mean? If you give a kid 5 years of just himself trying to work away at the philosophy or something, it's like, well, I don't see that working. Like, what model would you, like, what would that look like? You know what I mean?
We'll briefly get into learning theory here. So there's two ways of learning. Okay. You can learn by being taught, or you can learn by acting, or not like acting in a play, like going into jobs, that sort of thing. I think what we could do is in high school, in those, or even as young as like early high school, late primary school, we can be getting kids excited about forming opinions and get them excited about reading and doing more to encourage them to go out and do their thing. And I think that would be, and then they would learn from their own experiences, learn from their life experiences, learn. And what you're saying is true. You can't, the state of people now, you couldn't just be like, well, if you want to come and debate at uni, you got to go off and read 100 books, mate. But if you, from an early age, put these ideas into their head that, you know, what would be awesome if you went out and you worked on these things and you thought these things up. And I think that's a message that we don't get. I think it's almost even discouraged to a certain degree to go out and get your own opinion on things. A shift in the way we're schooled throughout our younger, more developmental years to sort of rewire our brains to be more eager to look into these things. And then by the time you get old enough to really form an opinion, then you can go into universities and have these debates and have these talks and do this research and write these papers and create resources and all those wonderful things that we talked about at the beginning.
But so I'm still a little confused. So let's say I'm really interested in history and I want to be a historian later on. The second I graduate from year 12, if you had control of that individual, what would happen to them?
What I would do is I would try and find a job that's adjacent to that. Now, I don't know what that would entail. I don't know much about history. And then while doing that, I would try and read as much as I can on it, and I would try and go and talk to people, different people about it, and just choose what I'm interested in, really. And then not go into one group, but go in different groups. And in the current way we have university, I'd go to different universities and talk to different people there. And then I would come back once I think that I've got my opinion on how I reckon the world works, and then I would go into and debate people and talk about it and see where the faults may lie and see what I like about other people's ideas. I think if you have that individual process first, which you could teach children to get to that stage, I strongly believe you could do that, then I think that it's just going to be a way more fruitful garden of like opinion and thought than there is now, where everyone learns the same thing, everyone comes up through the same steps, and then everyone has this like mainstream idea, whatever that may be at the time. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, especially if you're doing something like philosophy and you want to be a philosopher, and then you come out of school and you're kind of, I mean, what job?
Well, it wouldn't necessarily. You don't have to get a job in that area. I would just saying work, because most people that graduate would want money. But what I would be spending, because I can tell you now, learning in your own time is a far more efficient way of learning, if you do it correctly, is a far more efficient way of learning than at uni. Because at uni, you have to learn everything that you're being shown, because you have to study for an exam or study for a test. But if you're just researching what you're interested in, you're going to be more motivated to do that. You're going to read more about it. And I just think it's a far more efficient way of doing things than sitting and doing your 4 units a semester. You learn bits about that topic and then you move on.
Yeah. No, because I mean, that's more or less what I'm doing right now. Because I'm working and also kind of self-teaching myself with what I'm interested in as well, and not going to university and waiting until I really know what I want to do at university. I don't know. I'm still not. I don't see. I think there's a lot more. I think within the subjects of history, philosophy, literature, within universities, I think there's a lot more individualism than you would realize. To the point where it would allow people to have genuinely kind of individual views on things, which allows them to have decently good discussions. But I mean, it seems to be we keep coming back to that same point.
We could go round and round in circles forever. So, but no, this was a really good discussion. I think it got a lot deeper than I was expecting. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, with my idea of separating STEM from mainstream universities, do you think that's just a stupid, crazy idea of the past, or?
I don't know. I mean, we could get quite tribal in here and be like, why does STEM have to leave? But I think I don't know if they need to be separated. I just think that the HASS course needs to really be had a second look at and say, should it really be following the structure of learn, assignment, learn, assignment, learn, assignment?
Yeah.
So I reckon, yes, there is a place for HASS in universities, not how it is at the moment. That's what I would say. I don't necessarily think they should be separate purely because I think it's good to meet different people doing different things with their life. And, you know, but there's plenty of times where STEM and HASS cross over.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's how you do
boy.
it, folks. That's how you debate without turning into an argument.
Yeah.
As we say, this is called the Fence Sitting Podcast. Our opinions are subject to change. I'm sure we'll come back to this at some stage.
Anyway, yeah, okay, yeah, we probably should come back to it because I don't know, it's just kind of started me thinking really. Anyway, it looks like we've really gone into quite a bit of time. Can I tell my little?
You can. The time on we had quite a few technical difficulties, so there's going to be about 10 minutes cut out of this, so it's not too bad.
10 minutes. Okay, lovely. So, the other day, well, it was a little bit of a while ago now, actually. In fact, if you've made it this far into the podcast, I salute you. That's quite impressive. But now you get the little golden nugget, which, to be honest, you're probably not very interested in. I had a meeting. Well, a meeting. I was able to meet the former Prime Minister Theresa May of the UK. So she was Prime Minister from 2016 until 2019, about 3 years. In total is what she served. And yeah, I just thought, I don't know, this political podcast, I'd talk a little bit about my experience of meeting a former Prime Minister. So of course we had like the little, I mean, with my interaction with her, it was mostly just kind of small talk of course, because I'm in Scotland, my one personality trait is the fact that I'm Australian. So I was introduced as Australian to her. And she was like, oh, I've been to Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra, and I really enjoyed it. And then she was saying how Australia used to be the country which everyone laughed at for having so many prime ministers in a short period of time, but now it's turned the other way, and Britain's the country that everyone laughs at. It's quite funny. So she had a genuinely quite well-natured, good sense of humor. Seemed to be quite genuine. And the thing was, it was a dinner, so it was a dinner event. And throughout the dinner, she was on the head table. She made the effort for every single time she'd finished a meal, she would come out to the rest of us and try to get to every single table to talk, or to be available to talk to every single individual person. And anyone who wanted a photo with her one-on-one, she'd be more than happy to comply with. So she'd be like, she'd eat away at her entree, and she'd finish her entree, then she'd be out at the tables, and then the main course would be served, and she'd rush back and she'd eat her main course, and she'd finish up. And she'd go to exactly the table which she'd just left on and talk to the people there. And then dessert would come out. She'd go and she'd eat the dessert. She'd finish the dessert. And then she'd keep... And there was more than 100 people in this room.
Wow.
And she had the time to go to every single one. And even at the pre-drinks, she kind of mingled and tried to mingle with every single group. And I was with a more younger group of university guys. And of course, as a senior ex-prime minister politician, she could have quite easily just kind of sided us off, said hello for a few minutes, and then kind of left. But she came to our little university group, and she was genuinely interested in what each and every one of us was studying, where we were from, what our future ambitions were in life, any advice she could give. She just seemed like a very humble, hardworking, thoughtful lady. And like, there's often you meet, ex-politicians or current politicians, and there's like that crass, sarcastic, kind of genuine overtone, which you can really see is just being put on. But with Theresa May, there was nothing like, there was nothing underneath her which was fake, I felt. I don't know. She was just a really lovely woman. And when she did her main speech for the dinner, half of her main speech was talking about how former prime ministers should be more humble. Former prime ministers are just like every other person in the street, and that, they've had their time, they should chill now, and just take a break. And I think, you know, when you look at Liz Truss and you look at Boris Johnson, I mean, that's quite a personal attack on them, really, and what they're getting up to.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
How does it work once you're no longer a prime minister in the UK? Can you become a backbencher politician, or are you out of politics after that?
No, you stay as an MP, and you can be an MP as long as you want, as long as they keep electing you. So Theresa May currently she's still a backbench MP. She stopped being prime minister in 2019, and it's now 2023, and she's still on the backbenches. I mean, there have been points in time where, like, you can be prime minister, you resign as prime minister, and then a new cabinet's formed under a different prime minister, and then you come back as a new minister. So you can be a foreign minister or something, or a home secretary or something like that. So there's a lot of availability there. But the other point with Theresa May is that she's still putting in the effort to be a genuine constituency-based kind of locally connected MP for her constituency of Maidenhead, which she feels a large connection to. And like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, the second they stopped being prime minister, they stepped down at the next election, and they kind of went off and they wrote their memoirs and they gave speeches and they, got, put on specific boards and got all these different jobs. But Theresa May just kind of put in the effort, stayed on her what would be a lot lower backbench MP salary, and continued working for Maidenhead. She's just a genuine, hard-working, decent woman. And I think it's a shame that she was kind of treated so poorly by her party during the Brexit in Britain.
Yes, that is a shame. And her replacement was quite the opposite of what you described there. Will.
Unfortunately. No, unfortunately. So yeah, I don't know. That's so I was very happy with that meeting with that former prime minister. I also, I had an encounter with ScoMo just before he was about to become a former prime minister. And oh my god, that man, it looked like he was on crack.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Don't sue us.
Anyway. But yeah, so that was the Theresa May meeting. Very thoughtful woman. She actually has a book coming out at the moment, which it looks like quite a decent book, quite a thoughtful book. So maybe have a look at that if you're more interested. But yeah, the other thing I was going to talk about, it's quite funny, just to end on a lighthearted note. Well, lighthearted in some regard, quite dark in another regard, is that, so recently, I think it's something in the realm of 100,000 WhatsApp messages have been revealed, which were sent within the British government's cabinet during the COVID crisis. So this has been a major leak of top-tier governmental communication within Britain. And this amount of stuff it's exposed is absolutely horrendous. Kind of ministers, messaging each other at the cabinet table saying, what is this meeting even about? And what are we doing here? And, or let's bully this guy, or, have you remembered this? The kind of squabbling there. But anyway, so there's that whole side of things. But I wanted to talk about, it was revealed within this 100,000 WhatsApp messages that the British government played around with the idea to exterminate all of the cats within Britain because they thought they were spreading COVID.
Oh my god.
That was actual considered government policy at one point.
Stray cats or all of the cats?
No, all
cats. Oh my god.
All domestic cats.
What? What?
And the funniest thing is that it was revealed by a guy in the House of Lords. This guy called Lord Bethel was giving this interview on TV. And he was like, yes, it's obviously revealed that at one point the British government genuinely considered exterminating all cats within the United Kingdom.
Oh my god. What is... Do you know who put this idea forward?
No, it hasn't been revealed as to who. I think it was maybe just a general kind of theoretical consensus of the cabinet.
God.
But it is It's quite hilarious.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I know, which kind of makes you wonder, what's really happening up in the top levels of government sometimes. But anyway, so it is like it's a fact that the British government at one point considered killing all cats within Britain.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say to that. What else are they talking about? If they're willing to go, what else are they talking about? If that's what they're willing to.
Oh, I don't know. What else were they saying?
Any cocaine parties or anything like that revealed?
No. It was just I think it was like it mostly revealed how much of a toxic kind of boys' club mentality all of the top ministers had kind of got themselves into, with Boris Johnson at the helm.
Not as fun as a ridiculous decision, but
yeah. And the kind of the backhanded bullying and the scheming and the, Matt Hancock, who was the health minister at the time, apparently at one point he was asking other members of the cabinet whether he should do this photo shoot on a beach with like his shirt off. And like playing out that there was more context to it, which made it make more sense. But he was playing out that idea. Meanwhile, like the whole COVID pandemic was going on. So just really quite self-centered things like that have been revealed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, under Theresa May, things like that would have never happened.
Yes.
She was much more of a professional lady and politician. But yeah. Anyway, so there's a little bit of craziness to end the podcast on.
Well, thank you everyone for if you got this far. It was a dense one today.
Yeah.
I think I enjoyed our discussion. And please let us know what you think. We've got comments and email, and we've got a Facebook account you can message and an Instagram account you can message. Also, if you didn't see, we're on Spotify now. So yeah, thanks so much, guys. I'm not even going to say what we're going to talk about next week because who knows?
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
See everyone.
Thank you, Tiago. And yes.
Next week.